Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series on what you need to know about investing in the Chinese market. The whole purpose of this week's webinar series is looking at how to set up a company in China and what information do you need or what decisions do you have to make prior to incorporating that entity in China. Yesterday, we were talking about the importance of creating a business plan. Within that, understanding the types of legal entities that exist and then choosing the right legal entity by the business scope or business activities that you are looking to perform now, in 5 years, or even in 10 years' time. And then also looking at the company name and how that can be related to the business scope. If you missed out on that session, the recording is already up on our YouTube channel and you can take a look at it. Today's session is going to be looking at capital, so the actual money you are going to need to start up your business in China. Tomorrow we're going to look at location. On Thursday we're going to talk about what people should be appointed within the structure in China. And then last but not least, on Friday, corporate bank account openings and the difficulties that are surrounding that nowadays as well. If anybody has joined these webinar sessions before, then you know that I always like to understand who is in my audience. So if you haven't typed to me before or you haven't communicated with me before, please do let me know who you are. Are you a newbie to China, meaning that you are basically just looking to gain an education and understand what opportunities exist? What information do you need to protect your company? Or are you already a startup, meaning that you've transacted with China previously, either through your head office, or you already have an entity on the ground, and you're looking at understanding the administrational sides of things, the corporate compliance procedures? Or are you an experienced China hand, meaning that you've done business in China forever, and pertaining to this subject, you're trying to understand what are the new regulations about setting up companies in China, which there are many, and you're trying to get a better understanding about what decisions have to be made and how those might be different from how you previously operated. Please interact with me. Nobody has typed in anything yet. It's always fun on these webinars when people interact. It helps also for me to give a little bit more direction in how today's session should progress. So again, please do type in. How these webinars work is that I teach, I educate you. So this is going to be 60 minutes of your valuable spend of your time, okay? Use it wisely, ask away. I will not be leaving today's session until all the questions have been answered during the Q&A. So don't hesitate. If you've got a question, type it in immediately, and I will hit that as soon as we hit the Q&A aspect. On a technical note, I'm the only person within Woodburn that is performing this webinar today. I don't have colleagues around me. So when I am speaking, I cannot help you individually on any technical issues that may arise. Just note, if you do get bumped off of the system, there will be the recording that's on the YouTube channel. Alternatively, if something happens to me, so I have been having issues with my Wi-Fi lately, if I do get bumped off, it does take about 30 seconds to 1 minute for me to return. If that does happen, please stay on. I will be returning to complete today's session. If you don't have the time available to stay on, then just remember you can always look back at the recording on our YouTube channel, all right? Also, a side note, due to misuse of my presentations in past webinars, I will not be handing out the slides for any of the presentations this week. You will only be receiving the link to the webinar recording. So if you do need clarity on anything or you just want to discuss something regarding the presentations, you can always jump on a call with me, 15, 20 minutes, and we can go through it. How can I help you? So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Christina Kohler-Lucia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I'm a leading expert on inbound investment into China, and I have 17 years of on-the-ground experience in corporate services and corporate compliance in China. And I've worked with over 500 international companies since my start of my career, with pre-investment advisory, developing China strategies, and then implementing those strategies and focusing for a lot of those companies on growth in the Chinese market. And I'm also a creator of the China Roadmap methodology, which is a step-by-step plan that should be used by companies that are looking to enter or are already operating in the Chinese market to have a checklist of all of the bullet points that they should be thinking about in order to absolutely protect their business, have a solid foundation to their business, so that ultimately they can focus on growth aspects related to their China business. We perform this webinar on a monthly basis, so if you're interested in joining, we're going to have our next China Roadmap Method webinar on November 10th, which is next week. You can register either through this link or through our website at woodburnglobal.com/events. It is a great webinar for all those of you that are newbies and startups to really understand and be able to create your own step-by-step plan and guide. So what are we covering today? Let's start off with today's presentation about investment capital. Today, we're going to be focusing on the importance of creating a budget for your China business, what you should be including inside of that budget. We're going to be talking about investment capital, or more specifically, registered capital, and what that is and how to calculate it. And then we are going to be talking about the actual operation of your business, your company, and how you should be reflecting on the actual numbers with the budget, okay, and why that would be important for your journey. So now everyone has to interact with me, all right? I'm not turning the slide until people interact. I want to know who is a numbers person on today's presentation. All right, so type in yes for I'm a numbers person, and no for I am not a numbers person, because that will also give me an indication of how I should speak on today's webinar. Whether I can go technical, so okay, Rod is saying no, Tanya is saying yes, Hari is yes, Frankie is no. Come on, that's a 50-50 split. I need another person to tell me in which direction I should go. Seems that it's pretty evened out. So Jiyoung is saying I'm not, Nathan is a yes. Okay, that's still 50-50. All right, guys, it gives you a bit of an indication. So for those of you that are not numbers people, I will talk slowly, and I will try to be as transparent with the information, because I do know that if you're not a numbers person, this can completely overwhelm you, okay? Because it is slightly, when we're talking about things like investment capital and registered capital, that might go over your head in terms of how that works in China. So the first topic we're going to talk about is budgeting for China. Okay, so just generally, for those of you that are not numbers people, I want you to understand how important it is to budget for your China business. Okay, so for those of you that are not numbers people, obviously a budget can be a very daunting task. It can cause, it might in your mind think of that you'll have constraints on your business and you won't be able to abide by those constraints. But in the end of the day, the budget is going to be your guideline in terms of how much money and capital you need to start your operation in China. And you have to be so thorough when creating your budget, because you have to think of everything from your revenue to your costs to your just general administration expenses. You have to go through that whole list and go into as much detail as possible, because one of the biggest failures of companies that are entering the Chinese market is overspending and not having a control system in place that money just, I don't know, it goes poof, it disappears into the sky. and it creates a short-lived experience in the Chinese market. So really, the true importance of creating this budget is making sure that you know how much you should spend, and to then place a controlling system that someone is watching over your shoulder, making sure you don't overspend, okay? So what are ultimately the benefits of creating that budget? It's going to give you control over your registered capital, which I will touch on and explain to you for those of you that are not the numbers people, what that is. It will keep you focused on your investment goals, okay? Particularly if you have investors, all right? Because you are going to have to report to them on whether your company is succeeding or not. It's going to make you aware of where your money is going. To what is it going to be used for? Is it purely marketing? Is it going to go into the cost of goods? Is it going to go into salaries? Where is that money going? Where is it going to disappear to? Okay. And ultimately, it will help you to organize your spending. Okay. You're going to create a budget on headcount. You're going to create a budget on marketing. You've got to know what financial resources you've got at your fingertips. I always ask two people when they enter the Chinese market and they're looking to set up. The first is, how much money do you have to spend, right? And number two, do you have time to spend it? What are your financial resources and your time resources in order to push this project forward? Because you will need quite a bit of both. And in order to know whether you need quite a bit of both, you'll have to create a budget to understand that, okay? So again, I don't want to go through all of these 10 items in terms of why it's great to budget. For some of you that are numbers people and you're creating budgets nonstop, for you, it absolutely makes sense. But for those of you that are entrepreneurs, small, medium-sized companies, where you've just been given a number and nobody's told you to create a budget as a guideline. It is going to be absolutely critical for you to get that moving forward, okay? So when you're creating your budget, partner again with a local market entry advisor, all right? Because there will be for sure costs that you are completely unaware of when you're creating your budget. And actually, Hari asked a question when he registered for today's event about what are the most common missing expenses that are missed out on when creating budgets. And I will be touching on that in the next chapter, actually, Hari. So talk with someone on the ground who has experience creating budgets, who can share war stories or give you advice, or even can sit down with you to create the line items that will be needed in your budget, okay? But today I'm going to help you start off with a few of those. So definitely, definitely associate yourself with an advisor, a coach, a mentor, somebody you can brainstorm with and make sure that you have all the line items you need within your budget. The second is your market research. So how are you going to create revenue figures if you don't have data points on your fingertips? All right. Now, some people I've spoken to on today's session that are on today's session, I know that you've been approached by clients. You've got revenue guidelines already being provided because you've got clients, you're already negotiating contracts and whatnot. That's already a fantastic way to start, right? You've got clients at your fingertips. You're in this negotiation phase of negotiating contracts. In the proposals, you already have your fees allocated. For those of you that don't have that opportunity, you haven't started negotiating with clients, you need to come up with figures for revenues. And where are you going to start? Well, the beauty is maybe you can start off with how much are your competitors making? Are you able to compete with your competitors at that revenue level that they're achieving? And how quickly could you reach that revenue level? Price points. How can you estimate your revenue if you don't know what your price points are going to be? And you need to be able to compare that with your competitors as well. This is why, from a financial point of view, doing this type of market research is critical. You've got to do a competitor benchmarking to know what those price points are and to understand what the revenue levels are of your competitors in the Chinese market. The third step will actually be putting pen to paper and obviously the biggest question I get from people who are non-numbers, folks, it's like, where do I begin? How do I start? Okay, so there are three things you have to calculate. One is your projected sales. One is the direct cost of those sales. And the other are the fixed costs or overheads that will appear within your entity. And again, for those of you that are finance people on here, I apologize. This is Basic Finance 101. This slide is more geared to those of you that aren't finance people. All right, so you've got to project your sales, you've got to figure out your direct costs of sales, and you've got to figure out what your fixed costs or overheads are. So for example, one of the things that, and again, I was talking to a non-numbers person about this. They've already set up an entity in China and they're planning for their 2021 budget. And in their budget, they had added headcount. But then I asked them, I assume for each of these headcounts, you've got to buy a laptop. Where are the laptop fees in the budget, right? It hadn't been included. He hadn't thought through the process that when he's onboarding an individual, yeah, you got the salary component, but you got to give maybe a mobile phone, you've got to give a laptop, and the company has to purchase these things, okay? And that has to go into your assets, into your book of assets. So you have to think through all of these aspects, which is why if you're not a numbers person, you will need to brainstorm with somebody to make sure you're covering everything, all right? So when you are projecting revenues and sales, obviously for those of you that are startups and you have already been transacting with China, lucky you've got sales history at your fingertips, okay? Use that sales history together with the benchmarking you've done for your competitors. For those of you that are starting fresh and you have zero sales history, all right, it is a matter of then kind of guessing based on your competitors' figures what you might be able to achieve in the Chinese market. And this is where then your business plan and strategy become so fundamental, because you need to indicate in your business plan how you're going to achieve those sales. Is it through marketing campaigns? Okay, that's just one. Or is it through salespeople? You've got to calculate all of those things, right? In terms of looking at the business plan and then reflecting that business plan into your projected revenues and sales, okay? Now, what I do recommend people to do is not just create a budget that has line items in one column and then an annual figure in the next column. You want to break it down into a month-by-month budget. How much sales or revenue are you going to achieve in January? How much are you going to achieve in February, in March, in April, in May, so that eventually you hit the total number? Break it down so you have the ability to analyze very clearly your progress throughout the year, okay? For me, quite frankly, when you're creating a budget, calculating cost is the easiest, all right? So there are three types of costs you have to calculate. The first is fixed costs, rent, salaries. The next are the variable costs. So, the cost of raw materials, overtime potentially, logistics, whatnot. And then you've got the one-off costs, purchasing of computers, laptops. How are you going to forecast these costs? It's not like you're going to pick a piece of paper out of a hat and guess the number. You contact suppliers. Okay, it's really not tricky. You are looking to rent an office space. Well, the first decision will be business center or an actual office space. You contact a real estate agent, maybe contact more than just one real estate agent, and see what are the estimated prices for a business center against a real office space. Don't forget to add off the one-off capital cost of decoration if you go into an office space that you have to renovate and then obviously decorate, okay? For salaries, you can go to Google, type in China salary guidelines. You will come up with a lot of free salary guidelines that you can open up in PDF, look at, I don't know, let's choose finance people. You'll have a list of, I don't know, 15, 20 categories of titled individuals, everything from cashier to finance director, finance manager, and you will get the approximate salary rates. It's estimates. It's giving you the ability to get at least some concrete numbers to create a budget that you will want to show to investors, to your board of directors, to convince them of how much capital you actually need to pull all of this off. Okay, but for me, projected cost is the easiest. You contact suppliers, you contact more than just one for each line item, and you get a range. Okay, and then you put the items inside. Just remember, for those of you that are non-number people and you're looking for investors, you need to be able to justify every single number that you put inside your budget. So you have to be very, very clear of the numbers that you are injecting and why you are injecting them and how you made that calculation. All right, you have to be very, very clear on that. But for me, compared to revenue, I mean, especially with COVID, where every company has had to pivot in some shape or form, and definitely projected revenues have not been reached for every single company. You've got to pivot in ways, you've got to update your budget, you've got to be able to convince the investors and board of directors that you're fine, and you've got to make decisions very quickly. The budget helps you to do that, okay? Now, in terms of fixed costs and overheads, and this relates to Hari's question from the registration form, which was, what do people miss out on? So here are a couple of things that people miss out on. One, in terms of rent, right? Don't forget to include the management fees. And don't forget that management fees change. Normally, when you're creating a budget, you're going to have to not just give the first year of operation. Probably your investor or the board of directors will ask you to give the first year to 5 years of projected revenue and costs, okay? So when you're negotiating and contacting real estate agents and you're negotiating with a landlord, in order to be able to budget accordingly, try to negotiate a fixed rental amount and management fee for the first 5 years of operation, okay? Obviously, you have to weigh out a balance here because you have to understand whether that premise will fit your expansion in the next 5 years or will you have to move out, okay? You have to understand whether that office space is going to be for a long period of time or a short period of time based on your projected revenues, increasing headcount, etc. Okay, this is why for a lot of startups, I highly recommend starting off in a business center because you have this flexibility with the business centers of upscaling into a bigger size office or downscaling into a smaller size office versus being stuck in a premise that's yours for a certain period of time. And it makes it difficult if suddenly you have to upscale fourfold and there's no room whatsoever for people to fit in, okay? In terms of staff costs, social insurance is the thing that really catches people. When you are creating your budget, you might want to split out staff costs into 3 items. One is salary, one is social insurance, one are allowances, and then you might even want to have one for commission and bonuses depending on the type of people you're hiring. Social insurance is what catches people out when they're calculating the staff cost budgets because every single city in China has different social insurance rates and different social insurance obligations, whether it is for foreigners or whether it is for locals. Make sure you get that information up front. Talk to your local market entry advisor about creating salary budgets around specific salary ranges so that and the city where you want to be in, right? So that you know exactly what will be the social insurance obligations. Don't forget to add things like utilities, printing, vehicle expenses. And then obviously one of the things that people completely underestimate is the amount of marketing budget they need to put into that entity, whether it's advertising, promotions, just general marketing expenditure for the online marketplaces. for digital marketing, etc., right? It's truly an underestimated component. So prior to creating this budget, you need to approach marketing agencies, and again, do this with more than just one, to understand the full service scope that will be applicable to you. And obviously the marketing agencies will ask you, how much money do you have available for this? So you've got to set a standard amount and not go over it. And this is one of the biggest difficulties in China, is that there will be opportunities knocking on your door. So I'll give you an example for me. I get asked to speak at events consistently. Some I get paid for, and others I am requested to spend money out of my own pocket to attend those events. For those that I get paid for, hoorah, I'm thrilled. No issues for me there whatsoever. For those where I have to cover my costs, actually, I first weigh it out. What will be the potential return on investment if I go to an event where I have paid for a flight, hotel expenses, and probably you got to calculate a minimum of 48 hours of my time spent in that location versus actually sitting at my desk and talking to people. And you have to weigh it out. So whenever there are opportunities that are knocking on your door, which will happen, they entice you. This is the problem in China. They truly entice you. And this is, again, where the biggest mistake lies, is that people just want to grab them left, right, and center, especially in the startup phase. And then they don't look at their budget as to how much can they really spend on these types of promotions. Do they even make a proper calculation on the return on investment? For example, you want to attend a trade show. You want to have a booth. The amount of money you spend on having a booth and then decorating that booth, is it worth it? What is the return on investment on that? Okay. And again, opportunities come a knocking a lot in China. But if you've set an allocated amount and you decide to take up an opportunity, you will probably have to cancel something later on in the year in order to stay within your budget. And this is where companies don't do this type of analysis and financial controlling that they have to do. Okay. The last one, legal and professional costs. All right, this is also something that people underestimate, particularly when they don't have advisors on board. And they go either with their in-house employee to do all of the setup, all of the legal operations. They, I don't know, get contracts, God knows from where, and they don't hire the experts to do things properly. Your company will get into trouble at some point in the journey, and you'll be spending more to get yourself out of that mess than if you had used professional advisors at the beginning. I made that mistake in 2003 when I entered the market, and trust me, I made HR mistakes, I made contractual mistakes, all because we didn't adapt ourselves to the Chinese market and we thought we could do it in-house and do it alone. And we were wrong. Being a corporate service provider, I will openly say that we were very wrong when we entered the Chinese market. If I could go back, one of the biggest things I would fix is that from the day that I arrived in China, I would have gotten myself a mentor, coach, or advisor who could have guided me and introduced me to the right people to help me with the legal and professional costs, especially in my startup phase where my budget was critical to the growth of my business. And what was the outcome? The outcome was it took me much longer to grow than actually anticipated. So probably the three areas I want to warn people about are staff costs, analyzing that properly, analyzing your marketing costs, and then really looking at the legal and professional costs and making sure that you've got that covered. Just to give you another example on the legal and professional costs, and this has nothing to do with not even having an advisor. You can even have an advisor and, pardon my language, crap happens. You know, you can have an entity in China and all of a sudden you have huge turnovers within your head office that you have to change your whole corporate structure. I'll be providing that example on Thursday's episode. And you spend so much on legal fees because you didn't have the right people in place, and you have to go through bureaucratic procedures to appoint then the right people. All right, so important to get these things right from the beginning and having someone you can talk and discuss regarding these things. Another thing that a lot of people don't do, and this is just a basic financial controlling tool, is creating a projected cash flow and doing it month by month and knowing how much money is going to exit your company or enter your company. But predominantly in the startup phase, it's exit your company on a month by month basis. What has to be paid when? When does rent have to be paid? When do salaries have to be paid? When do suppliers have to be paid? When do logistics firms have to be paid? You have to know month by month your cash flow projection. Will you have enough cash in your bank account to sustain you? And again, this is where a lot of people fall into issues and where it impacts your registered capital amount and in emergencies, how to get more funding. Okay? Because it is not a free access into China to get money in and out from shareholders. So creating that projected cash flow is critical, just as a control system for you to know how much money will go in and out every single month. And most importantly, negotiating with people and understanding what has to be paid when. So what is the purpose of the budget? The budget is supposed to be used against your business plan to create a financial strategy. The importance of the budget and then looking at the actual figures is also doing a benchmarking of your own performance year on year. So this is why I say when you're creating your first ever budget for your incorporation in China, it's going into the details of your line items as much as possible. Instead of just having one line item for revenue, you might have 10 different line items for revenue because you're selling 10 different types of products. Doing this type of analysis from day one gives you this benchmarking opportunity, but it also helps you to make decisions like, for example, do we exit a product because it's just not successful? Or do we import more products because we see that the whole line and series is doing so well? Going into that detail is really, really critical. And then obviously it helps you to monitor your key performance indicators, everything from revenue, costs, working capital as well. The whole point of the budget is that it is a financial controlling tool to spot problems that are going to occur or the red flags that might pop up. So to get to the nitty-gritty, registered capital. What is it? This is a term that is used everywhere in China to talk about an item that needs to be submitted when registering your company in China. So when you are registering your company in China, and I'm talking about a limited liability company, you have to indicate what will be your registered capital amount and what will be your total investment amount. For representative offices, there's no capital requirement. So there's no item in the registration where you have to indicate registered capital because it's a cost center, although you do have to maintain a P&L and balance sheet, and there are taxes that are imposed on the representative office. There is no actual working capital that has to be indicated. It's purely for the limited liability company where you have to make this initial capitalization, and it's called registered capital. So when you are registering your company, there are two numbers you have to provide. One is the total investment amount and one is the registered capital amount. Now, before some people object to what I'm saying, yes, under the new foreign investment law, which came out Jan 1, 2020, you're supposed to not input a total investment amount. However, with the incorporations we've done in 2020, we've had to put an amount in. So I'm just telling everyone up front, be prepared, you'll have to put an amount in for total investment and registered capital. What's the difference between the two? Registered capital is the actual working capital that will be injected into the bank account in China, will be used to pay off all of your expenses until you have a positive cash flow status. Total investment is a ratio number against the registered capital amount. So if you have a registered capital of under 500,000 US dollar, it's a 7-to-10 ratio. So let's use the example, registered capital is 70,000 USD, the total investment would be 100,000 USD. 70,000 goes into your bank account in China, and the difference between the registered capital and total investment, The 30,000 never has to go into the account. Never. It is called your foreign debt loan. It is a way for you to get capital if it is needed for expansion, or what is mostly used by my clients is as emergency funds, which in 2020 during COVID, nearly all of my clients brought in their foreign debt loans. Okay, so you'll have some advisors tell you, oh, just keep the registered capital as the same amount as the total investment. Absolutely. You could say registered capital is 70,000, total investment is 70,000, but you don't have this emergency fund ability if you want it. So matching it from my perspective makes no sense, because you want to have this fund available as a just in case amount to be able to get money in China. Okay. Last but not least, please remember that with registered capital, there are no minimum capital requirements. Legally speaking, there are no minimum capital requirements. You may have some economic zones where they will have internal special policies saying that they will only accept foreign investors that invest a certain amount, okay? But by law, there are no minimum capital requirements, which means if all you need is 50,000 RMB to start up your business, you can put a registered capital amount of 50,000 RMB. I personally, Woodburn, as a company, we've never gone with a client that's invested less than that, but in theory, you could. Now, all I'm going to say to you is this: is 50,000 RMB enough until you have a positive cash flow status? You have to make that analysis, okay? You need to make sure you've got enough working capital to sustain your organization in China. The worst thing you want to happen is that you have to approach your employees and say, I apologize, we're 6 months into the operation and I can't pay your salaries because I don't have enough money in the account. It's the most embarrassing thing to do. And trust me, I've had employees do this. I've had companies do this to their employees. All right, to the point where by the time that new capital arrived, these employees had gone 3 months without salaries. You don't want to get into a situation like that, which is why it is very important to make sure you create a budget to know how much capital you need to build up this business in China. Okay, so some tips: you need to invest sufficient funds. Okay, too many investors spend too much time finding ways to minimize these investments, only to find out that actually expenses were greater because they didn't do a proper budget analysis, they didn't contact suppliers, or they used a budget that they created 2 years ago and didn't amend it, and realized, oh wow, China got a bit more expensive over the last 2 years. I really should have amended my budget because rent is more expensive now, salaries are more expensive now, operating expenses in general are more expensive now. I want to highlight right now, China is not cheap like it was 17 years ago. And people, again, forget that. If you are looking at Shanghai in itself, and again, my profession is in the accounting sector, accounting salaries for accountants are relatively similar to Hong Kong, if you can even imagine that, okay? And everybody always assumed in the past that China was cheap. It's not, it's getting to Western levels. And you've got to be prepared for that and benchmark for that and do your budget to understand that. So what is your action plan? This is your action plan. First of all, I just want to highlight one thing, is that the Administration of Industry and Commerce, as well as the tax bureaus, they like to see that companies invest more than 1 million RMB. They like it. It gives them a sense of commitment to the market and a sense that they have enough funds to build up their business. If you don't have 1 million RMB to inject as registered capital, please don't do it. I'm just highlighting here what these bureaus like to see. They're never going to deny your application if you put in less. Okay, like I said, I've actually incorporated a company with only 50,000 renminbi. All right, and remember, also, nobody is going to ask to see your business plan or your budget. Previously, in the past, it was a requirement. The government wanted to see it at the point of the incorporation application. It is no longer a requirement. So creating this business plan and this budget, you have to be disciplined enough to do it yourself and make sure you've got it at your fingertips to know how much capital you really need. When you are calculating your capital, calculate it as your startup phase, not just year one, right? So if you do a 3 to 5 year projection, and even at 5 years, you're not going to be cash flow positive, then you've got to think of your registered capital as that value. Okay, but obviously, this has to make sense for you. There's no trick here that I can give you to say every company should invest XYZ. It has to be based on the capital that you need to let your business function. Now, the biggest question that I get asked, and I'm surprised nobody has asked this yet, what happens if you do not have enough capital to fund your China company? Okay, well, you'll be happy to know there are backup plans. So here are 3 options that are available to you. One is use your foreign debt loan, which, as I explained earlier, is the difference between the registered capital and the total investment. So if registered capital is 70,000, total investment is 100,000, it's this 30,000 difference that can be used as your foreign debt loan to bring money in. The downside to this is that you will have to set up a foreign debt loan account with your bank, which takes a minimum of 25 to 30 working days, plus the application of approval to get that money in. So in total, you're looking at anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks to be able to get that money in. The second option is increasing your registered capital amount. So let's say you increase your capital from 70,000 to 150,000. Okay. The downside to increasing your registered capital amount is, as I explained yesterday, your company in China, your limited liability company, is liable up to the registered capital amount. So there has to be this balance of how much capital do you need and how much risk are you going to take with that liability and that amount. All right. So if you increase it to 150,000, I have no issues with that, but have you processed that it's also going to increase your liability within your company? Okay. When you are doing the process of increasing your registered capital amount, although you don't have to open up any new bank accounts, you still have to go through an application procedure, which does take between 6 to 8 weeks to get the money in. The third and the most immediate solution, especially if you're running out of money, is creating a type of service agreement to receive funds from the shareholding company. Now, the downside of creating the service agreement is obviously, number one, it should be as true and valid and authentic as possible. And number two, there are going to be tax liabilities on that invoice, from VAT to, to just VAT. Okay, so basically it's your China company issues an invoice to the overseas entity for technical service, marketing service, repayment of exhibitions, God knows what. And then the overseas entity pays money in. Okay, but remember, there's no way of getting that money back out. It's not like you can go through a dividends process or anything like this. Okay, so please keep that in mind in terms of how to get more money in. Are these 3 options. It's getting your foreign debt loan, increasing your registered capital, or creating these, what I call, again, emergency service agreements just to get funds in. Okay. When does the capital have to be injected by? All right. So the injection time frame is based on the term of validity that you indicate for your company setup, which is also something that you need to indicate when you're incorporating your company. The minimum is 10 years and the maximum is 50 years, okay? And you can choose any number in between 10 and 50. All right, so I don't have a standard. My clients are way off in terms of choosing whatever number of years they want. But ultimately, what I want to highlight based on today's presentation is if you invest 70,000 renminbi, 70,000 US dollar as registered capital, and you choose a term of validity of 10 years, you have 10 years to inject those funds, okay? 6 months prior to the termination date of your company, you have to go through a new renewal process, which is almost like a whole new incorporation, okay? Because you've got to redo all of your documentation that I had highlighted yesterday. All of those documents about the incorporation process will come into the renewal process. There is no pro or con about whether you choose 10, whether you choose 50, etc. Just remember that the amount that you choose for your registered capital has to come in that time frame, must come in that time frame. All right. So these action plans basically that I've highlighted here today in terms of creating your budget, in terms of understanding your registered capital and the amount of money that you need, understanding what is the time frame of injecting that capital, will set you up for the growth in China. Because what you don't want to get into is a situation like many of my clients where they get into financial difficulties because they didn't calculate the right registered capital. They got into situations where they couldn't pay salaries for a certain period of time, which then caused turnover of employees. That halts your business, right? That just simply halts it. You have no room to focus on growth if that happens to you. And you don't want that to happen. You want this whole planning period to be bulletproof so that you can always focus on growth in China. In order to be able to focus on growth, you want to be able to check the actual numbers that you are producing in China against your budget. So every single month, what you want your accountant to produce for you is a P&L with revenue broken down as detailed as possible, costs of goods or services as detailed as possible, and then fixed costs and overheads and general administration expenses as detailed as possible, so that month by month, you can look at your actual figures and compare it to your budget, okay? Like this, you will be able to do analysis work. Analysis for reasons of any shortfalls, which any investor will look at in detail. Looking at reasons of why you might have a higher turnover than expected. Comparing the timing of your income with your projects. Are you getting paid when you are supposed to be getting paid? Okay. Analyzing these variations will either help you to amend your budget, i.e. reforecast. And number two, decisions. It will help you to make decisions on how to move forward, and it will help you to make those decisions very, very quickly, okay? Do you need to cut headcount because you're not reaching your revenue levels, right? If you're not reaching revenue levels, we're gonna have to cut costs somewhere. Are you gonna have to renegotiate with certain suppliers to get cheaper fees, right? You've got to analyze all of these things very, very carefully as you start operating in China and once you have your company. And the budget should act as that tool for you to be able to make these types of analysis. So according to your actual expenditure, are you analyzing your fixed costs? Are you analyzing your variable costs? Are you analyzing cost against turnover, etc.? Again, for those of you that are finance people, this will all make sense. But for those of you that are non-finance people, this is so critical. I can't emphasize that more. All right. Final tips to follow. Don't rush yourself. You can't build a budget overnight. It simply won't happen. It takes time to reach out to suppliers to get cost amounts. It takes time to do a competitor benchmarking or to look at sales history to create projected revenues. All right, take your time and talk with a mentor, coach, your CFO, whomever, to brainstorm these figures to make sure you've thought through all of the various line items. Be conservative, right? And it's great to create a budget where you're making profit on year one. Trust me, that won't happen unless you have really calculated and taken care of every single line item. So try to create, as a tip, some slack and wiggle room within your budget to make sure that you just simply don't get disappointed and lose motivation. And then start early. So for all of you to understand, in China, the fiscal year is January to December, okay? So if you guys are looking right now to establish your businesses, we are in November. And if you start tomorrow with your company and corporation, probably right after Chinese New Year, so end of February, everything will be established. So you're thinking about starting your operation 1st of March. So your budget should really be from 1st of March to 31st of December. And then for the following years, always think about starting your budgeting process from after the October holiday, the autumn festival. So mid-October, early November, you should start thinking about doing your budgeting for 2021, okay? So again, start early, create many drafts, have somebody to brainstorm to think about all the various line items you have to have. And then please monitor, please evaluate, and reforecast. What I mean by this is that you want to utilize your budget as a tool, looking at your actual figures and be able to make decisions. What COVID-19 taught me was that actually this year I've been amending my budget on a monthly basis, something I've never done before. But that was just the year that we've had. Myself internally in terms of making sure that my budget was as realistic so that I could understand even in June what my year end would look like. Okay, so you've got to utilize your budgets to continuously amend, change, reforecast, etc. So guys, tell me today, what are your takeaways from today's session? Let me know. Please do type it in. What was your biggest takeaway? Just give me one item that you have learned about registered capital, creating your budget for the Chinese market. I would love to hear what you've learned. So Tanya was saying that that she really liked the info on registered capital versus investment capital and the inner workings between the two. Great, Tanya. Anybody else? I do have some questions that have been popping in at the same time, so we'll hit those at the Q&A as well. Please don't be shy. Let me know what you have learned. Nathan, a comprehensive budget is critical for the setup. It absolutely is. You have to be as comprehensive as possible to really know how much capital you need. Absolutely right. All right, just to move on. One thing that I'm not highlighting in today's session, because this happens once you are operational in China, is everything about dividends, about reserve funds, about all of those inner workings. So once you are operational and once capital is injected and once you want to repatriate profits, there are inner workings and details you have to learn about those processes. That in itself is a whole webinar. So I haven't touched on that today. I'm happy to jump on a 15-minute call if people want to discuss those inner workings because it does reflect on your registered capital, etc. Just other people have been typing in. Rod's been learning about capital investment unique to individual needs until it's cash flow positive is met. Jiong said it's not easy to project a total investment during COVID period. Completely understand that, Jihong. It is very, very difficult. Nobody really knows where the next 6 months are going to lead to, but we have to, try. We have to try and create budgets as closely as we possibly can. All right, so how can I help you? Well, first is obviously in relation to education and advisory. We offer advisory services in the pre-investment stage of companies. If you'd like to have more information on that, let me know. In addition, we offer market research. We can also help to create and validate business plans and budgets with you. We also do trademark registrations, incorporations, and then we also offer implementation and growth services as well. So if any of you are interested in any of those or want more details, please don't hesitate. We can jump on a 15-minute game plan session to go through, where do you want to be in the next 12 months? Where are you today, and what might be some of the obstacles that you're running through, and then how Woodburn can help you. So in the chat box, I'm just going to give you, again, my link to my diary. Alternatively, you can also reach out to me by email if you want to set up an appointment. You can also add me on WeChat if you haven't done so already. And just for your information, on WeChat, I've got a China roadmap community of existing clients, potential clients, and just generally end companies that are looking to formulate a network and friendships amongst people that are in the same boat in terms of incorporating the structure. So if you want to join that community, just connect with me on WeChat. Let me know China Roadmap Community, and I will put you in there. And you'll get updates. You can also talk with the other people that are in there in the community, etc. Email, I'm going to add that in as well so people have it. So LinkedIn too. So let's go through some of the questions that have popped in, and there were two specifically. One was from Rod. So without wishing to be negative, are there any costs associated with closing a business in China, i.e. penalties, for example? So Rod, if you are, so let me backtrack. When you are creating your articles of association, which are your company bylaws, when you are incorporating your company in China, in those bylaws, there is a chapter on exit from the market. And in the templates you get from the government, they usually have 3 or 4 items inside. We always look to expand on that because there could be so many reasons as to why you are looking to exit a market. For example, you don't reach revenue levels for a period of consecutively 3 years. And so it just simply does not make sense for you to continue. Or you have had management issues, turnover in the management that has prevented you from growing, and as a consequence, the shareholder is looking to close down. So you have, first of all, this guideline in your articles of association for basically exit strategies in terms of closing down your company. When you go through the process of liquidating your company in China, there are no penalties. Nobody is going to say, naughty you, you're closing down or anything like that. But what you do have to know, just like anywhere else in the world, when you're liquidating your company, you have to make sure that you have paid out to all of your suppliers and that you've received all your revenue. Okay, so you've got to do that plus and minus there. Okay, unless you are filing for bankruptcy. That's a separate procedure. This is if you are consciously going ahead with a liquidation. And once you have your accounts all settled up and you have terminated all contracts with everybody, lease agreement, salaries, etc., suppliers, clients, whatever, you can start the liquidation process. The liquidation process does take between 18 to 24 months because you have to go through a very lengthy closure audit that investigates a minimum of the last 3 years of operation. Obviously, if you haven't been even incorporated for 3 years, you'll look at the time frame that you've been incorporated in, and then you start the liquidation. And it's basically your advisor or your corporate service provider that will go through that process in terms of the liquidation. There'll be nothing that you have to do any longer. So Rod, I hope I answered your question on that. Jihong was asking, can total investment amount be adjusted later? Yes, the total investment amount can be adjusted. So actually, when I was saying that you can increase your registered capital earlier, you will automatically increase your total investment as well based on the ratio. So the two come hand in hand. You increase one or the other, they will be increased at the same time. And it'll be based on the ratio amount. Pascal was asking, are there any negative, i.e. legal implications of having a high total investment amount in order to have the possibility of a foreign debt loan? So Pascal, there's a ratio. So it's not that, you know, if you have decided on a registered capital amount, the total investment will be reflected within the ratio. So if your registered capital is under 500,000 US dollar, the ratio is 7 to 10. If it's, I believe, 500,000 to 2 million USD, you're looking at a 50-50, a 5 to 5, you know, half ratio. The ones above, I'm not sure. Now, just for your reference, under the new foreign investment law, there actually should be no total investment value indicated in your incorporation setup. It's just that we still are putting those numbers in. And it just, what the impression that we're having is that although the new foreign investment law has come out, look, operators know how to make those amendments in the system. So when you do the online declaration for the setup, they still require you to put the total investment amount in order to submit. So we're stuck there. We have to put that amount in. But no, you cannot just simply choose a very high total investment amount. It has to be this ratio. But remember, the registered capital amount has to enter the account within the term of validity. So that difference is, first of all, limited based on the ratio. So you have to weigh all of that out. Pascal, did I answer your question on that? Let me know, or if I didn't, just explain what you're really looking for. That was somebody else. All right, I'll just keep going. So again, if you want to set up a 15-minute game plan, let me know. Really, no strings attached. The whole point of this game plan is for me to understand where you want to be, where you're at, what obstacles are in your way, and for me to see whether I can help you or not, ultimately. So don't hesitate to jump on a call with me. And last but not least, are you ready for the next 3 days? I do know that each session is a bit overwhelming, but that's also why I have split out the topics into 5 days. Tomorrow we will be talking about the importance of location, which is something that people truly underestimate because there are a lot of legal and tax issues surrounding that. Thursday, we're going to be talking about people, and Friday, bank accounts. So if you haven't registered for any of those events, sign up, woodburnglobal.com/events, and hopefully I'll see you guys again in the next 3 days. And please don't forget, we do have this fantastic WeChat China community that I am looking to grow. It's with people that are already in China, people that are looking to go into China, and it's a great way for you to just meet people from other industries and other sectors. So definitely, if you do have WeChat, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be more than happy to add you in. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I will be staying on for another 5 minutes in case you have more questions and you haven't had time to type everything in. But otherwise, I'd like to thank you all so much for your attention, and goodbye.